I'm going to shape the conversation with a few slides on what's going on with emerging media and personal consumer broadband, some stats that I've compiled over the last couple of months, and then I'm going to turn it over to the panel with a few questions. First, I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Brian Kajowski. I'm the previous president and co-founder of 360i, based in New York. We're pretty large on the East Coast for in the online interactive space, performance and search marketing specifically. And so we're getting into a lot of this emerging media. I want to start immediately, just quickly, with a few slides that are some industry stats. You may or may not have seen these, and then we'll turn it over to our panel to introduce themselves and speak about how they view consumer personal broadband. So on the screen, you can see there, we have blogs and RSS, podcasting, and in-game advertising, which are explosive right now. There's also, the picture is in animal advertising. This is specifically sheep-vertising. And sheep-vertising, it's somewhat less technical. You don't have to, sort of, Dr. Robert Arnn over here, he's an MIT grad. He even understands the sheep-vertising content. But that's another emerging topic, perhaps for another conference. So why should we care about this emerging media, the alternative vehicles that we're looking at right now? What this slide represents is our lack of attention to typical medium right now. So in 1965, roughly 35% of the TV viewers could recall an ad or a brand specifically after they'd watched a night of TV, and then that diminished over time and sort of corresponded with additional stimuli and distractions that we have around us. So as TV became not the only vehicle, in 2000 we see only 9% of consumers watching TV can actually recall what they did. So that's mainly because we are all guilty of it. We surf the web while we do it. We're on our phones. We're talking to people. We're TiVoing everything. So and I don't have the stat for 2005 or 2006, but we can imagine that 9% is probably skating closer to zero. And so that's really why it's very pronounced why we should care about all these other vehicles as advertisers and marketers and people that are trying to drive a message across. So this guy, Jonathan Schwartz, CEO of Sun Microsystems, is talking about blogging. And I know that a lot of these bigger companies, sort of, their blogs it may not be as exciting or interesting, but they're taking them very seriously. And he talks about, it's just a more efficient means of connecting with the marketplace. And in 5 or 10 years, almost every one of my peers will be a blogger, and that's pretty serious when you're talking about blue chip companies like this. And McDonald's seems to take notice of it also. They have quite an important blog and a discussion center on their website. So does Boeing. So does GM. And I took these are large companies. I know that when I blog, I deal with some smaller, maybe more granular companies, more gritty things, more volatile or provocative topics. I'm not necessarily on GM blogging, but it's important to note the big fellas that are setting the stage and governing what's going on in the blog market. Miller is blogging aggressively, and they cover industry news, including competitors, serving as a beer news resource. So what better way for them to capture information about people interested in brewing and beer in general rather than just their specific brand? So according to Technorati, blogs are doubling every 6 months. The number of blogs out there are doubling every 6 months. And in April 2005, Technorati was monitoring 9.4 million blogs. That same 12 months later in 06, they're looking at 35-point-something million blogs. And that's pretty precipitous growth. So, but the big question is, how are we making money blogging or any of these other alternative vehicles? So, Gabing Voigt says, how do we make money blogging? And his colleague says, well, maybe if we bore enough people, they will start paying us to stop blogging. So, and so that just, I think that's profound because there is a lot of questioning, and there's a lot of people trying to make money doing these things. They're spending a lot of time, they're capturing a lot of eyeballs. And a lot of these alternative vehicles are limited in volume, limited in impressions, and advertisers are having a hard time coming up with enough inventory to make it lucrative. So that's another challenge, and I'm going to ask our experts over here to talk about that. But real advertisers, rather than paying us to stop blogging, real advertisers and advertising networks in the blog community and the RSS community are coming on, and these are a short list of some pretty major companies that are spending some money reaching customers and reaching consumers or prospective consumers through blogs and RSS feeds, and that's significant. I imagine this is going to be huge in the future, and that's translating into real dollars. So in 2005, blogs, podcasting, and RSS advertising in the US was roughly $20 million. 1 year later, it's more than double that. It's about $50 million, so almost 150% increase. And alternative ad spending in the US in general is aggressively focused on blogs right now, because I think blogs had a little more traction than podcasting and others. But I think we'll see those podcasting and RSS figures growing, and this is obviously a market to watch. So then what about podcasting? I mean, what exactly is the excitement with podcasting? So all these devices that we're carrying and listening to audio on are commanding a market for podcasting. So it says here, 56% access podcasts on their computers, 46% of users do so on their portable devices, and 88% listen to podcasts in their entirety. They opt into podcasts, they listen to every word, including the pre or post advertisements on the podcasts. And we all, many of us own MP3 players. I mean, how many of you in here own an MP3 player? So almost all of you. So that's profound. So you all are candidates for podcasts. And how many of you all listen to podcasts? Almost all of you. So that's impressive. So the podcast, according to eMarketer, 10 million people listen to podcasts this year, and 50 million will be doing so in 2010. So the podcast subscription chart looks great, and those that are harnessing podcast as an advertising vehicle should be smiling, especially in a couple of years. And then eMarketer says, eMarketer and PQ Media have very prominent stats here that show that the combined market will reach $50 million in 2006. eMarketer says 300 million in 2010. And there's podcast advertising networks. There's about 6 of these. I have 4 listed here. I thought Fruitcast was a great name. And so the podcast placements we can see on NPR, McDonald's, GM. Again, the big boys are taking this very seriously. Whirlpool. And they talk about how they're reaching their customers, and they track this very closely. They're not spending that much money on it. That's what the beautiful thing is. It's on their website, the RSS and the blogs and everything else. Corporate podcasts, Purina dog food podcasts. And let's talk about in-game advertising. This wasn't a specific topic on this, but it is so massive. If we look at, in 2010, we're staring at almost $1 billion spent on in-game advertising. eMarketer says, speaking from the same podium a year later and quoted in a recent article in Adweek, massive CEO Mitch Davis predicted that U.S. in-game ad spending would range between $1.6 billion and $1.8 billion by 2010, that it would account for roughly 3% of all media dollars spent. And that's, I don't know, he's obviously preaching his own business, but if that's the case, then that's something really serious to watch. So look at all these consumers. If we all, in the Habbo hotels and the Neopets and the Coke Studios and Guild Wars and these in-game or these gaming environments, huge volume of very sticky visitors in a very sticky environment, just waiting for advertisements, and they're seeing things like this. In the Sims world, we can see, the McDonald's kiosk there, and it's very graphically enticing, and it's aesthetically appealing, and we're interacting with it, just because we're in that game and we're spending how many hours or repetitive views and impressions on those specific games. American Apparel in Second Life is reaching a younger audience. This is the first time a large apparel company is reaching audiences in in-game advertising, and this youth market is tremendous. As we can see what Starbucks is targeting youth market, so that maybe they'll continue to buy for the rest of their life. The credit card companies kill for the youth markets. That's one question I have for the panel also is, is it just and we're going to get to that, but is it just, how do we get outside of that youth market, and are we pigeonholed just for, especially in gaming advertising or these other things that are more edgy? And then some of the more serious providers, Wells Fargo is trying to get, into these active worlds. This last slide is on connectivity. So it shows, I think this is really important from a search standpoint, when the left hand, it's really the left hand and the right hand, when something in the blogosphere is hot, it also becomes hot in the search space. So there's a huge correlation and interconnectivity between these marketing vehicles. So if my company is blogging, or if I'm getting a lot of traction in the blogs or in the social communities on a specific topic, I should probably focus on my search marketing effort around that as well, so that is creating search activity, and that corresponds, and you can see that there, that the searches for that specific blog topic spiked in Google at the same time the blogs were percolating. So that's it. That's to shape the conversation, or just to give you an industry platform. Now I'd like to ask each panel member to introduce themselves, tell us what you do and what your company does, and then also speak a little bit about how you view these emerging vehicles, RSS blogging, podcasting, in the context of your company and your expertise. So if I could start with you, Tom.
Yeah, my name's Tom Merritt. I'm editor for CNET.com. We're an online publisher of technology news, reviews, and downloads. My job particularly is in the media and entertainment department. I help develop and in some cases co-host podcasts. We also do video, both streaming online, podcast video, and we just launched CNETTV.com. So we're looking at this particularly from a content provider's point of view as another avenue of reaching the audience.
Thank you.
Thanks, Brian. My name is Don Lowe, and I work for FeedBurner. I don't know how many of you use RSS or have heard of us, but we provide a wide array of services to help publishers with their syndicated content. We essentially have a feed management platform that enables publishers both big and small, so blogs, podcasts, as well as folks like Reuters and USA Today. We help them measure their audience, grow their reach, engage their users, and last but not least, a really important topic here is monetize their content in distribution, so as it gets syndicated off of their website. Currently, we have about 230,000 publishers in our network, and we have a ton of commercial publishers, including Reuters, USA Today, Tribune, Wired, Ziff Davis, on and on. And interestingly enough, we also manage about 60,000 podcasts and videocasts. And that chart you put up there before, it's actually doubled since you had, I think it was March or May or something. We now have about 20 million daily RSS subscriptions we deliver, and about 3.5 million of those are for podcasts. So the ramp in terms of people using RSS and people subscribing to podcasts, videocasts, and RSS in general is continuing.
Hi, I'm Bart Fader. I'm the CEO of The Feed Room. The Feed Room's been around in the online video space since 1999, which I guess makes us ancient in current terms. We've moved over that time from being one of the pioneers in the portal space. We had our own online video portal back in 1999 and 2000, which, by the way, was not a great business model for us in 99, 2000. But we were smart and we survived, and we've actually morphed the company successfully to where now, with a much better business model, we provide services and solutions helping other companies power their broadband video, their podcasting, their RSS. Folks like the New York Times and USA Today on the media side, Walmart, GM, HP, Sun, so a couple of our customers up there, the Pentagon on the corporate and government side. We did our first RSS feed for video. I asked the guys to look it up this morning because I couldn't remember when it was. It was actually April 15th, 2003. We started using RSS for video because we've always believed in the time that we started the company that this game is actually relatively simple, which is you have to create great, compelling, timely, relevant content, find the shortest path to reach the target audience, whoever that target audience may be, and then figure out, and whatever distribution channel you need to do that with, whatever device they happen to be on. And then what we do with our clients now is really help them identify, achieve, and measure an ROI around that. So I think one of the things we'll talk about today, and one of the real challenges here, is not just around a lot of content with a lot of eyeballs trying to make that connection, but how are we all making businesses out of that? And that's one of the real challenges and one of the things we work on with our clients. And it isn't always about advertising in our minds in the traditional sense. Some that you brought up doesn't use video and podcasting and RSS just to sell to a target audience that is a consumer, but really about making a world of Java developers understand what Sun is doing. So I think it's more complex than just looking at advertising models. It's really about understanding how all of this helps you develop an ROI, however you end up having to define that.
Right, I'm Robert Arnn. I'm CTO of ITVA Digital Media. Our company is, I think, unique in this grouping at least. We're an infrastructure company. Our job is to get whatever content is being created or drawn from the audience out to that audience. And our particular focus is on video. And I'm here today really to explore for myself whether video is going to become pervasive, not just in mainstream media, but in the alternative media. If it's so, then there's a big problem, because if you want Akamai to deliver it for you, you can't afford it. And if you want BitTorrent to deliver it for you, you won't like the consequences. So you're stuck between money and quality. And our company has a new technology base that's trying to position itself so you can get the quality you want at the price you can afford to pay in these media things. So it's very important to us, and probably to all of us here, whether video is going to become pervasive. Everyone, I've heard every session that I've gone to has assumed that both mainstream and alternative communications are going to be pervasively based on video. If that's true, there are a whole series of impediments that we've got to get over in the next 18 months.
We should talk. And Bart, I hate to tell you, but Bolt was founded in 1996.
Okay, you beat me.
So I win.
You win.
It's odd, actually. I mean, it's amazing how unpopular it is to be a 10-year-old internet media company. Everywhere I go, I think it's so cool. It's our anniversary year, planning a big party in New York, and people are like, "Really, you're 10?" It's like 10 is the new 80. Bolt is I'm sure many of you probably know the business. It's I call it a people under 30 media business. It was one of the original teen community sites. I was a founder of that business, but I was a part of a group that spun it off to a bunch of venture capitalists and was gone for 6 years and then came back a few years ago. Bolt was founded on anonymity. And Friendster came along and said, actually, people want to be who they really are. And MySpace was able to take advantage of that. So Bolt had a core group of very creative, unusual people who we felt we needed to give them a better tool set to play with. And video, as you're about to find out, we relaunched our product in February with 2.5 million uniques, and we now have 5.5 million uniques, all this according to ComScore. Bolt gets nearly 100,000 pieces of content uploaded to a day. We get thousands of videos and pieces of music uploaded every day. And we reach millions of people via alternative technologies, particularly the code sharing business, on a daily basis. All over the internet. And what I would characterize, and I think this is a really important framework to use, what I characterize as the Republic. And I have a 6-year-old son who went through a heavy Star Wars phase last year. And I, of course, went through my own heavy Star Wars phase. What you'll find actually is people in their 20s don't care about Star Wars, they missed it. But the Republic, as you all know, is a loose confederation of planets, and those planets are places like MySpace and Xanga and LiveJournal and Bolt and PhotoBucket and Flickr and many, many hundreds and hundreds of other sites you haven't heard of. And the Republic, I think, is why RSS, podcasting, and a variety of other technologies are taking off, because essentially what we have is everything is distribution. You can find distribution everywhere. And I run a business that reaches 500,000 people a day on Bolt and 2.5 million people a day inside the Republic. And I don't monetize the people all over the Republic. I only monetize the people on Bolt, but my audience grows as we kind of go along. So what I would characterize as a lot of distribution technologies that we talked about, and by the way, I thought your slides, Brian, were phenomenal and so far above the typical bar of conference presentations. I don't know how you all felt, but I was like, wow, these slides are really good. So I think that there is a very, very significant disconnect. The last thing I wanted to say is your point about youth, and is this youth only? I believe there has never been a larger difference between a 40-year-old person and a 20-year-old person than there is now. And I'll just conclude my opening remarks by saying, I have 2 young children, and it is not clear to me at all that they know about the existence of the internet. Their assumption is connectivity. The computer is a connected device. And so I think what we're seeing is a very, very significant generational change between those people who had some internet when they were in the 20s, those who grew up with it from, say, teenage years on, and now a generation that's under 10 who just never knew a world without the internet. And I think it has massive ramifications.
Excuse me, it's a very interesting group of people up here. My name is Evan Berg. I am Senior Director of Business and Corporate Development at Bright Cove. What we've created is a service that allows publishers of all sizes to very quickly create broadband programming channels and add monetization features and syndication and distribution features to that as well.
All right, thank you guys. So you can see that we have an excellent group here, and Robert Arnn is actually a doctor, and I was curious, I didn't get to ask him beforehand. Can you tell us what your doctorate is? And I know you went to MIT, but because we'll have certain questions definitely directed to him because of this. So
It's in computational linguistics.
computational linguistics, okay.
Should we switch topics to that?
No, I was actually going to ask Tom if he could spell that.
You would have to moderate.
Okay, well,
So
he's
this is now rocket science, right?
no, this isn't. And Tom's the editor at CNET, so he knows what computational linguistics is.
Well, there's different theories, right?
Oh, there's different theories. No, so you can see that we've got a very esteemed group here. Some of them have gray hair, which is good. So the first question that I have for the fellas here is, the 40 versus Aaron brought up the 40 versus 20, and what is the significance of that? And I do think there's this huge disparity between that. So all of these, in-game advertising, mobile advertising, all the emerging stuff, the first people to take on these things and play with them and really marinate in them are the younger folks. And how does that, when we look at companies like, I listed all these large companies that are blogging and doing RSS and all these other things, how does that affect those companies? Is it effective for them to do that, or do they have to wait until this youth market grows up and then eventually everybody will be embracing it? So can we talk a little bit about that? I don't know who wants to start with that.
I was just going to say, this is another form of communication, right? This isn't replacing everything that exists. This is a new generation. We don't know what the next device is going to be. We all sit here today and we'll all be here 3 years from now and everybody will have a new thing in their pocket. That'll be the next new device. You'll be watching video on your refrigerator in 5 years. It won't matter, there won't be your computer in your kitchen, it'll be right there in your refrigerator and you'll be watching video. We don't know what that is, and what we find with the companies we work with, and a lot of the ones that you mentioned up there, is that they are early adopters of technology and marketing strategies. And they're sitting around rooms and they're saying, we have to continue to grow our company. So we have a marketing strategy that says we buy the CBS Evening News because we're reaching one audience over there, and we're buying other media over here. And boy, we better start raising our brand awareness with the next generation of car buyers, hamburger eaters, whatever that is. So if you're General Motors, and that's a customer of ours, they are very clued in on the fact that the blog that they run has to have video in it. They have to continue to move down that path, because the guys who are buying, and gals who are buying the next generation of Hummers and are going to start being able to think about that and afford that and understand that brand are young and are consuming in this way. So I just think it's wrong to say that this is a young person's medium. This is just another form of distribution. These are more devices. Any company that has a device strategy is missing the point. This is a digital media strategy that they need to employ, not a device strategy.
It's also, I think, and I'm always surprised how many people in our audience for our podcasts are outside of what you would consider the typical young demographic. It's almost more of a mindset than it is just a straight age-based demographic. I think the younger audience is often seen as larger because they have a way of grasping it faster than the older audience. So if you're trying to reach those older demographics, you have to do a little more work to explain it. I think RSS is a perfect example of that. Young people get it immediately. It takes a while to explain it to people who aren't familiar with it.
I'd also add that probably the distinction to make is between the consumption side and the production side. So on the consumption side, people have been going to websites for the last 10 years now, right? Something like that. Yahoo just hit 10 as well. And those folks have sort of RSS and podcasting and so on, over time, that's going to mirror the exact same population, the demographics of that internet population. And in fact, when I was at Yahoo, we did a study on RSS adoption, and 4% of the people knew what RSS was, 31% used RSS, they just didn't know it. It's the background technology, no one needs to know how to use it. And the demographics of that population pretty much mirror the internet demographics. So if it's something to help you consume more content more efficiently, that's great. It'll probably be the entire age range. But when it comes to production, I think that's where the sort of older demographics are having a tough time, because they're not participating in producing the content. They're not using these new services. They don't go to MySpace and whatnot to communicate with other people. And in fact, MySpace is really nothing more than just email, right? It is communication. It's less about self-expression and more about communication. And so I think there is that goal, but it's really on the communication side, not on the consumption.
Yeah, I think the whole issue of content and the person's relation to content is the key. And I don't think it's age-related, but there's just a gigantic wall between the people who think of content as something external that you consume and those that identify themselves with content. They're part of the content. They produce content. They don't even think of production in that sense. Production and consumption are the same thing. You extend your personal boundaries out into these communication networks. And why you can't tell the young people, like kids, they don't think of there being a network out there and them as a person. They're part of the network and the content's part of them.
Right.
So
you don't think that's age-related, Robert? Tell me about your friends from MIT who are making content.
Well, maybe statistically so. But I think that's going to really change as this becomes more pervasive.
You do?
Yeah, I really
yeah, I mean, that's a really, I would argue that there's a major time factor that we need to talk about as part of this. I often describe, and I agree with Tom, that it's a little bit dangerous to talk purely about ages. I think that's a very helpful kind of caution there. That said, the demo that we're talking about in the user-generated podcast, maybe not podcast consumption, I'd look at data because I think that's more formal and editorial-based. But that's, thinking about all of these different technologies is the generation that says, hey, do you want to hang out Saturday? So if you still use the phrase hang out, you're in the demo. If you don't, if you say, hey, you want to get together? Or if you say, hey, you want to have a play date? You're not in the demo. And it is my belief that the Hangout demo, which as Don points out, is emailing and messaging and saying, hey, what's up? Hey, thanks for the ad. Those kinds of communications that you see on Facebook and MySpace, which are immensely social applications, that's an extremely youth-oriented behavior because they got the time. They're just not going to class. It's cool, or they're doing it while they're in class. So I think it is heavily, heavily youth skewing. And I think if you flip around and you look at YouTube, YouTube is left youth skewing, but guess what? Who can raise their hands in this room and say, who uses YouTube? Okay, all of you need to switch to Bolt, but that's fine. Anyway, raise your hand if you have any friends on YouTube. Okay. Point being that YouTube is really not a friend-oriented product, and what we have is we have a framework here that's social on one end and content upload and proliferation on the other end. And I think that what you find is that the social piece is really a very under 30 piece. And it just,
But if you look, and maybe this connects the dots, because we've talked about earlier in the context of this notion of we call it a personal media universe, right? Everybody in this room has one. we have, we only have 24 hours a day. We consume X amount of media during that time. We have the shows we watch, we have the shows we TiVo, we have the podcasts we subscribe to, we have the sites we go to. We all have that world that we've created. The age difference may be about how you create and manage that world. Because if you're older, you probably have fewer components of that. You're more susceptible to mass market intervention. If you're younger, you've probably created a different kind of world that's now penetrated by somebody sending you an email or an IM or a tag to a video. It's a different way that you manage it. And I think the challenge to marketers and all of us is, how do we do that when we used to understand what that media universe looked like? We don't understand it at all because there are 200 million of them.
That's right. That's such a good point, right? There were 500 channels. There were 5 channels when we're the 5-channel, no remote control universe, right? That's how we grew up. That's how I grew up.
So I was the remote control.
You had a remote control, Tom. You're younger. I grew up with no remote control. I had to use a dart gun. I had one of those TVs with the buttons on it, and I would use a dart gun in order to try and change the channel. You had to really have good aim. And then we went to John Malone's 500-channel universe, and Bart makes a great point. This is a multi-100 million channel universe, and that's why RSS and the various distribution mechanisms are so critical. We would not be growing without those viral distribution mechanisms. We just wouldn't. We couldn't get there. We wouldn't scale.
It's a lot of interesting points, and I think we can talk a lot about this. So it sounds like if we put it in terms of something more traditional, you have all these retailers out there, and all of them, spend lots and lots of money on catalogs. And then over time, sort of into the mid-90s and late 90s, they started cutting into the amount of catalogs that they disseminate. Paper costs were high, and they'd rather just go directly to this web channel. But they could never default and move entirely to the web channel and say, forget it, we're not sending out any more catalogs. Because there's still that audience that likes the catalogs, and maybe that audience is getting smaller, and maybe the web audience is getting bigger, but it's just a variable channel strategy that we have to focus on. So when these big companies are going after, even today, what is a small audience through blogs or podcasts or in-game advertising, maybe that's a burgeoning audience, and so it sort of grows and siphons money away from other vehicles as we sort of progress, and as the young audience right now grows up into mature consumers. That pretty much summarizes it. I mean, at least a couple of the points we made. Mm-hmm. So if we can, let's talk on that topic. We're getting smarter and smarter about avoiding advertising. And so, I've been in the ad space for 8 years. I founded an interactive advertising company 8 years ago, and we've done huge stuff. So Weather.com is one of our clients, and they say, our customers get so upset because they have to look at that pop-up ad on the homepage of Weather.com. It probably annoys all you guys too. And my response to anybody who says that to me is, would you rather pay $25 to get weather, anytime you wanted it on a monthly basis? Would you rather have to subscribe to it like you do for your fast access internet? And everybody says no. Okay, fine, I'll take it. But it's just a moment of that thought to say, how is this stuff being funded? So that goes right to blogs, podcasting, and everything else. Granted, it's cheaper to some extent. But can we talk about what these audiences are doing now to avoid advertising and how effective advertising is within these new medium? I don't know. Evan, do you want to start on the other?
Yeah, I'll say a couple of things. I think you're definitely starting to see a wide range of what type of advertising is starting to show up, whether that be advertisers publishing content or programming content actually for the web, whether it be someone like General Motors or some of these larger brands that are actually getting back to kind of the world of soap operas where they were funded by soap companies. So I think you have that on one end. I also think that what you're going to start seeing a lot more of is less of the intrusive pre-rolls or post-rolls or mid-rolls or what have you, and much more immersive branded experiences in which, and I think you showed a couple slides up there that take that to even a greater extreme. But
like the sheep-vertising?
What's that?
Sheep-vertising?
Sheep-vertising, that's right. But adding branded experiences, games, quizzes, little things like that. Very small in the sense of intrusiveness, but that allow for people to actually go and get a lot more context about what's being advertised for.
Yeah, I think I agree with all of that. And the challenge, I think, and I've said this at these panels before, I think there's a huge burden on the advertising community to start thinking a little more clearly about how to do this. That business has been dominated for so long by the 30-second spot. They're being pulled kicking and screaming away from that unit, the pervasive, dominant unit of television media advertising, the 30-second spot. And that's just, it's not the world that we're going to be living in. We're not in the world of the 30-second spot. In a world where somebody has the attention span to only watch 1 minute of content at a time, they're not going to sit through a 30-second ad. It's just not going to happen. They're going to click out, they're going to get angry, they're going to move away. And I think that it is both the content folks who tend to have more creativity around that, but clearly the advertising community just has to think about who that target audience is, how they're trying to reach them, how they're going to integrate that messaging with the content. People don't mind. I mean, I always use the example of the magazine. Right? People have the opportunity to skip ads in a magazine all the time, yet there are still a lot of glossy pages of advertising in magazines, and it's still a very effective means to reach a target audience, and that's why there are still magazines and still a lot of glossy pages, and you don't have to read a single one of them, but you do. Why is that? Because when you pick up Vanity Fair, you spend the first time you sit on the airplane, you're reading Vanity Fair. Before you get to the first article, you're going to look at 30, 40 ads because they're great. They're interesting and they're provocative. And you don't have to, right? You could skip right to the first article in Vanity Fair, but you don't. Why is that? Because they've thought about who the audience is, how to tailor that advertising to that audience, and how to create an experience that you know to be your Vanity Fair experience, or your Sports Illustrated experience, or your Car and Driver experience. And that's what we have to get to, I think, in online communication, and we are woefully behind in that.
I think you're absolutely right. I mean, it's really instructive to look at, in the places where people can skip advertising, when do they not skip it, and when do they actually, in fact, seek it out? Like TiVo, for instance, has statistics on the ads that people will actually rewind and watch over and over again. In a milieu that is often maligned for being able to skip right past it. They don't always skip past it. So looking at why that is really important to pointing how to make that work. I mean, with our podcast, Buzz Out Loud, we have a very short advertisement in the middle that is audio, and most of the listeners say they listen to it because it is short, non-intrusive, and without us even trying, the voice of that has become a character that they'll write emails to and talk about on the message boards and whatnot. So, getting that advertising without impinging on the editorial content to be interesting and part of the whole scheme, like you're saying with Vanity Fair, I think that's very important.
I think integration is the issue we're all talking about here, and I think one of your slides gave the beginning of the answer there when the in-game advertising. One, it's big today, bigger than the other things you pointed to, and it basically integrates with the game. It's not, let's take a break from the game and move off to the ad. It's part of the flow of the game, and it's largely unobtrusive. And if you extend that into video generally, I think you see over the last 10 years, really the beginning of the answer in the big entertainment media. A lot of movies that I go to see are actually ads. All of the content is placed. There isn't a single object in those things that hasn't been actively placed as an advertising act. So, particularly action movies I like, and I look at them, it's all advertising. There's a thin story that puts it together, but it's all advertising. We haven't extended that into the online world, but I know of several startups that are headed towards objectizing video. And once objectizing video happens, then every object inside the video is an interactive entity that can be in advertising, can be a link into advertising. It's totally integrated, and I think the problem at that point simply goes away.
I just want to add, from a FeedBurner's perspective in terms of inserting advertising on blogs and RSS feeds, we're definitely taking the sort of traditional media model and putting ads directly within the conversation, where people are subscribed to content, very similar to sort of a magazine subscription. But one thing we're starting to see, which is really interesting, is just the notion of more and more marketers becoming publishers themselves and sort of interacting with the ecosystems, whether they be MySpace or Facebook or whatnot. And we're giving them tools to be able to embed little Flash objects and JavaScript widgets and so on, so that they can either be like virally shared around MySpace or wherever, any blog, any site. And as long as the content's good, it's actually getting picked up. So Purina was on there as an example. They're starting to use us and use these tools. But the places where you see it really start to work are the entertainment companies. They've figured this out. So all the movies, all the record companies, all of the TV shows, they all have blogs, they all have little widgets, they all have friends and profiles in MySpace, and that's how they're doing their marketing. And without that viral distribution, they wouldn't be able to connect with that audience. And so I think it's really important to have marketers in general start to think about how they publish and how they interact with that audience and how they let their audience speak for them, essentially, and evangelize for them.
But I think first of all, just a couple things. The magazine industry saw a massively important teen magazine fold in the last month, which is Teen People. So I think that's a significant moment, and you probably already know that Elk Girl has exited the same category. And that's a pretty significant moment. I agree with Bart. We are woefully behind in terms of adding value for those particular. I mean, fashion industry continues not to buy advertising on the internet, and it's a very important advertising category, particularly for the people under 30 businesses who don't get a tremendous amount of erectile dysfunction advertising and in general farmers.
By the way, I'm not speaking to the growth opportunity in publishing, but just to the effectiveness of that advertising.
No, I agree, but I think that the fact that there's a demo, that you're seeing some, I think IGN and GameSpot over time will kill off the game print industry. I'm not bullish on Ziff Davis's, internet, gaming print business. So I think there's going to be some changes there. I will tell you though that we've run immersive advertising programs for Wendy's and Scion that have gotten millions of people to participate. And then we've run immersive advertising programs for some companies I won't name that have been entirely less successful, really significantly less successful. And I think the difference between the two programs that were extraordinary and the ones that were not is we offered value to the user. The user got something in exchange for participating in the advertising, in the case of extra functionality, whatever. Another example of this was on MySpace where X-Men did exceptionally well with its profile and got a couple million friends because MySpace added some functionality. But, Superman and frankly, almost all those other profiles you mentioned have, out of 50 million people, 20,000 friends or 30,000 friends who are just diehard about having the most friends on MySpace. So the immersive, I happen to think, by the way, that profile as ad has a limited half-life. I mean, the hardest thing about running Bolt is that we have to be so innovative on the marketing experience side. And we desperately need that the video that has objects that we can slide into it, because all of our editorial people will say exactly what you said, which is if you want our reach to go like this, put up a pre-roll ad, forget 30, put up a 15. We see our reach go down if we put up 15s. Yep. So if we don't find some better, more innovative way on the video advertising side, then we don't really have a business here. And in terms of video advertising, and I think that's that brings into question, will the empire be able to sustain itself? I don't know. When we talk about the Republic, a lot of us here are part of the Republic. The empire is network television. I hope everyone realizes that. And we are all working together, all over this room probably, to take money away from network television. That is what we do. That's where the money's coming from, and it's because of your slide, Brian, which, as you say, has trickled down to 2005. We're now looking at people can watch a couple hours of primetime television and not remember a single ad. I mean, that is, monumentally insane for marketers, and people know it. P&G knows it, GM knows it, the forward-thinking bloggers that you've put up there.
So what exactly is the situation is that the effectiveness of advertising empirically is getting diluted because consumers are tolerating less and less advertising. So they either eradicate advertising entirely using TiVo or don't watch or avoid things that are too commercialized. And the only things that are working in this space are things that are so excruciatingly subtle, like a Coke bottle sitting on the table way across the room in some game, or a very short. We can't have these long rolls on these video advertisements or the podcast. They have to be so short and so subtle and so contextually appropriate that they almost don't seem like ads.
But there's really two ways of looking at advertising. One is clearly trying to build a brand and brand advertising and those traditional things that they still want to buy TV for because they think they're reaching the most people who get that impression and impression-based television advertising concept. But the notion of the direct advertising, the notion of you do look at ads when you're buying a car. And if you've made the decision to buy, there's nothing you do more than look at television, look at car advertising. That's what you do all the time. You go on Edmunds and you're watching the car ads, and you go on all the automotive sites, and you are just a consumer of marketing messages about cars. And you're driven to it. You're excited about it. That's what you're doing when you're going to buy a plasma TV. Anything that you've made the decision to be a buyer of, you are going aggressively. You're using search. You're using friends. You're using references. You're going to buy something. And I think that what ends up happening is we mix up those two things a little bit between traditional brand advertising and its effectiveness on the web, and what the web can do in order to drive sales of product. And if your friends on a site are all talking about it, if you go on and say, hey, who bought the latest cell phone? What my camera phone works better than your camera phone. What is that called? I think that's called advertising.
But Bart, the distinction is that there's passive potentials that are out there that don't know they're interested in the car yet, and then there's active seekers. You're talking about the active seekers. The active seekers are looking, they're searching for automobile information, they're trying to consume as much of as they can. But the difference is when I'm playing that game, and then there's a Chevy that's driving by, how effective is that Chevy, and how blatant can that Chevy be to influence me to become interested in a Chevy or in a Coke product or Starbucks or whatever? That's the difference. So
right.
When advertisers start using these vehicles, and these new emerging vehicles, and have to be subtle, they pay for them. At the end of the day, how effective are these things going to be? How much brand influence are they going to have? Like we remember back in the day with Jurassic Park, what was the one vehicle that was advertised in Jurassic Park? Jeep. The Ford Explorer. So you guys, it was a Ford Jeep. It looked like a Jeep, but we don't really care. It was a 4x4, right? It could have been a Land Rover. That's what's happening, though. These product placement things, and then there's always the Friends episode with the laptop sticking up with a little logo on the back of the laptop, whether it's whoever's paying the most that day. At the end of the day, it's just that product. How effective is that? And that's what we're getting to, I think, with this advertising on TV in the Super Bowl. We see this ad, we pause for 30 or 45 seconds to watch an ad about the Ford Explorer or about Budweiser, and that is it. Versus watching something very subtle or passive that I may not even be looking at in the game, and maybe, there's just a real distinction about the brand impact of that ad that on the TV, whether I'm passive or active, or this new media advertising that we have to be so careful, we have to walk on eggshells that we don't alienate our audience, and then they don't watch our video as many times. It's like finding that balance is so tough. And I welcome.
But what's going to get you to understand a new product line? I mean, I go back to this idea of penetrating your personal media universe. So, if you're not watching a lot of television, so we'll pick an age group, 25. Okay, so it's in between, not quite 18, but you're a 25-year-old, and you're not watching a whole lot of TV. You might watch some sports if you're a man. You might watch American Idol. I don't know what you watch. I'm not 25. You don't watch a lot of TV, but you're trying to. The marketers are trying to reach you. Right? Is the effectiveness to empower that viral marketing aspect of it, even from a brand perspective, to try to create community and viral marketing around that? Because otherwise, how do I get? And this is maybe a rhetorical question, but how do I, as the marketer, penetrate that 25-year-old's world effectively, both from a brand perspective and from a buying perspective, if I don't use all of these various tools out there to do that?
Yeah, and I think the ads can be active without being intrusive. There are definitely advertisements out there. That the Hanes one, where the grape is driving a hoopty ride around, is one that our audiences talk to us about. Where it's just a regular TV ad, but it gets people to stop and actually click on a thumbs up on TiVo, and then you get a 3-minute version of the ad, and people have done that. So there's still hope for active ads. They just have to be more creative, and they have to, like you're saying, identify with the audience that you're trying to reach.
I also think that if the content is done correctly, you will subscribe. So I've subscribed to the, I can't believe I'm going to admit this, the Target Sunday Circular for my zip code, because I actually do want to see what's on sale, and I don't want to get the paper anymore. And so I don't want the glossy looks, but I want to know what's on sale at Target, so I have that on my Yahoo page.
So should we do a show of hands on whether you're in the demo or out of the demo?
I'm probably out of the demo. Right?
Do you hang out?
Then the very worst.
Just a little bit.
But it is Target. Give them credit.
It's Target.
Right.
Yeah, yeah.
Right.
And I think you're going to see more and more companies doing that. And as long as the content's
But that's
compelling.
value, but you've
That's
already
value.
done it because you're finding value.
That's
in it.
active seeker.
Yep.
That's active.
Actually, well, it's
Well,
not really active
Well, it's
seeker.
an in-between.
Right.
It's in between.
Right.
It's an in-betweener.
I'm tracking, right? I also have the digital photography review like website. Now, I probably buy a digital camera once every year. So I'm not an active seeker, but I sort of am, right? And so I track things and I subscribe to content that I like.
Yeah, I like that.
Any
I
other
think,
comments? Oh, go ahead, Robert.
One of the things we might consider is if we assume that creative gets better, smarter, and the tools are there technically to integrate some of these things, I think that will be true. We still are sort of leaving the consumer, the audience sort of disconnected from this. And I think that that's not what's going to happen and what the indicators are. There's going to be, the audience is going to cease to be audience and be part of the messaging there. And that leads to what I think the biggest impediment in this whole area is, which is intellectual property. And we just haven't seen the tip of this iceberg. Once, if people are worried about snipping bits out of television and movies, the proprietors, what are the advertisers going to think when their ads are mashed, sampled, and repurposed into and inserted into other contexts? This is like a major kind of problem.
Well, I actually can speak to that because Bolt is 1 month away from putting up a very significant piece of new functionality that's very iMovie-like, that's web-based. And as I said, we get hundreds of thousands of pieces of content uploaded all the time, so you're going to be able to mix and match photos, music, and movies. And I've been talking a great deal about that. And Robert, man, you've got it. There's a lot of anxiety in Cincinnati, and there's a lot less anxiety in Los Angeles. So some advertisers are willing to set their assets free, and here we go, because they get this immersive notion, and it's frightening for them because of course people can put up swastikas and et cetera, but the fact is, if people are really motivated to do that, they could do that now. And I think the belief they have is it is so difficult to build a brand. I mean, keep in mind, how many people in the room are over 30, say, or 35? 35. So if I say, hold the pickles, hold the lettuce, you say what? Yeah, and what brand is that? Wendy's? Burger King. You know. I mean, and we could go on and play this game on and on because our heads are full of jingles because we're that generation. Today, there aren't a lot of, go ask your 16-year-old to name their favorite jingle. Try it. They don't know.
It's a ringtone.
Yeah, they don't know, right, exactly.
My daughter, wears Aeropostale.
Aeropostale, right?
Thank you. Well done. And she doesn't call it that, she calls it Aeropostale. But she wears that because she's never been marketed to by that company. She's never seen a television commercial
and she's conscious
for it.
of that.
Well, but that's not why she wears it. She wears it because her friends wear it.
Right.
Because they went to the mall and one day they changed the image of that store and somebody walked in and they did a good job of somehow reaching a certain demographic, and now she and all her friends wear that clothing line. But it happened in a different way than we all learned how to eat.
Correct. So
Burger King.
I think it comes back to this notion of including this issue that you just spoke about, the IP issue, which I've had conversations with a lot of media. It's not just advertisers, media companies. What are you doing with this large library of content? Are you going to let people play with it? Are you going to let people play with your trailers? Are you going to, and that's what the generation wants to do. This is the most creative generation that's ever lived. They have broadband, they have digital devices in their pocket at all times. They are, to use the LiveJournal people's word, life recorders. And you know what? It's fun to mix, Julia Roberts in with your, your own videos. It's cool. That's what they like to do. You make this point about making content. So I think if you're going to engage and try to get a hold the pickles, hold the lettuce phenomenon among young people, you're going to have to do it with that kind of integrated programs. I mean, the subservient chicken thing, Brian, which this room, we've all talked about subservient chicken so much, right? That's inner circle to the web industry. Nobody under 30 cared about that program. That was Crispin Porter really doing an excellent job saying we're a really innovative advertising agency. Now the Volkswagen ads on YouTube, they've been much more successful. By the way, on Bolt, the Volkswagen, the Jetta ads, I don't know if you're familiar with them, incredibly popular. These very, very powerful ads. I mean, certainly, I don't know about popular, they're viewed a lot. So I think what's really interesting about these conferences is there's not enough people that are 25 on these panels. I really would encourage those of you who are in the conference development space.
Bring your kids.
Excuse me?
We should all bring our kids.
Yeah, I'm not quite there, even though I have gray hair.
Yeah.
25.
So
Mark's got to bring his daughter.
Yeah,
Exactly.
she's only 12.
So Aaron says that the kids aren't, or the youth market, or Bart said the youth market isn't remembering the jingles, and so that's the branding. Really, that's the brand that the companies are trying to propagate, and you remember the jingle, and then you sort of think about that when you're hungry, I guess, and then you go to Burger King. But so if branding is really not that effective to the youth market, isn't what we're trying to do with advertising in these emerging vehicles brand oriented? Because if I have an Apple computer sitting in the room, I'm not, it's not actionable. I want them to think about that. Or if any of these car ads or any of these things, it's really brand oriented. So 5 years ago or 6 years ago, we were brand oriented on the web, and then everybody lost money and realized that they need to be more performance oriented. So then search just blew out of the water, and everybody's now spending all their money on search. And now you're telling a search audience, companies that are on the web spending most of their money on search because it's actionable, to go and become brand advertisers again to some extent, right? So it's tricky, I guess. I guess search will never go away, and I guess this branding piece will just be the branding online.
Well, but all other advertising, other than DR, through the mail or whatever, everything is brand. Most advertising dollars go into brand. And I certainly don't mean to imply that brand advertising doesn't work. I think it does. The example I'd like to give, if I can, is an offline example. Again, coming back to Scion, which, by the way, is doing a kind of decorate your car with all kinds of content-oriented stuff with us. And they've been a good social. Scion and Wendy's have been very good social media marketers. They're very smart. They're good case studies for everybody to check out. Scion also has gone across the country this summer, and they have in the middle of the night gone in and repaved 350 skateboard parks and written their logo, like in a very subtle way, into different places in the park. And then the next day they're gone, and the kids come, and the thing's been repaved, and they see the Scion logo in a very low-key way. And Scion's whole thing is, how do we add value? How do we add value to our customers? And that is, honest to God, I think that's one of the most brilliant marketing. Forget internet. That's brilliant marketing.
Yeah, and I don't think brand doesn't matter. I'll give you another example of my 12-year-old daughter, because she's not here, and nobody else is 12 in the room either. But American Idol and Ford, okay? The Ford commercials that aired on American Idol, which my kids loved, and they used the TiVo to go back and watch the Ford commercials on when the show was airing.
Fast forwarded past.
And they went online to watch them all again and again and again and again. And I don't think Fox did the greatest job of integrating those into the website. That's a different story. But the notion that, and my kids know that those were Ford commercials. They're not ready to buy a car yet.
Right.
But if they had to name a car brand, probably the only brand that they would come to top of mind would be Ford, because Ford made the decision to fully integrate their brand with American Idol, both online and offline.
But unfortunately, there's only one American Idol, right? American Idol is the only show on television today that reaches 20% of the country.
But that's that is an American Idol exclusive idea. But they did understand that to take that brand identity of something that their audience isn't necessarily ready to buy, to say that, you know, this, my audience is, whether the audience was
You're
3
right,
people or 100 million people,
Right.
my audience is a lot of kids, and I'm going to start talking about Ford in a way that they can absorb and understand, and they can do that online and offline. The fact that they had hundreds of millions of viewers is sort of the point, but not exactly. Anybody can do that if you know what you're trying to achieve, who that target audience is, how to create an integrated marketing plan to achieve that. The web allows you to do it if you give it enough thought, but I don't think enough marketers are giving it enough thought.
There was Burger King did a thing earlier this year, and it was a jingle of sorts, but it wasn't really a jingle. But they made this competition. I don't know if it was on YouTube. It was one of the user-generated video sites, and they set up this competition for people to submit videos with Burger King, with the Burger King guy in the costume. So they sent out all these costumes. They sent out thousands of these costumes to people that were interested. And then the one video, and I was doing research on it, and I was trying to find one video, and apparently there were like 3,000 videos submitted. The only one video that I could find that endured like 6 months was this one of, you know, this kind of, not porno scene, but it was like sort of under the covers, and you could see what was, you know, sort of construe what was going on. Did you see this one? And then the sound effects, all that you would expect, and the porno music, and then Burger King, dressed up in his costume, pops out of under the cover, you know, a mess. And, you know, I don't know if that, but that's what resonated, you know what I mean? That's what I could find for the, you know, this was the ad that, you know, it's a jingle of sorts, but now I'm thinking when I'm hungry, like, is that Burger King, you know, does that repulse me around? But what I'm saying is, why does, you know, that, because if it bleeds, it reads, sort of like the press, if it's something either really gory or sexual or something, then it's going to propagate, but then that's really not doing a good job for Burger King, and it was this big discussion about, well, the message Burger King was everywhere, look how many impressions it got, but in sort of, it might have backfired, and that's what our audiences are doing now. These young audiences are only excited about things like that, and they become very viral when they're sort of nasty or inappropriate or not really about the product. And I think that's a big problem with this, and as marketers use this vehicle, they need to be very careful about how they don't cross that line, how they sort of keep their content.
You know, this is less true. Let's flip that around and look at Nike, which some of you may know, MetaCafe, the site MetaCafe, which has raised a lot of capital and has actually been one of the only, in my opinion, other than Bolt and MetaCafe, have been the only 2 video sites to grow during YouTube's unbelievable rise. I mean, if you sort of look at video data. And MetaCafe, some of the top-rated videos on MetaCafe are Nike. Particularly, this was true during the World Cup, were Nike ads from around the world, largely showing Ronaldinho doing like unbelievably cool stuff. So now Nike's an unusual brand. It's aspirational. It's sports. Burger King has different challenges because they're not as cool. But I think what brands don't do well is own something that's aspirationally interesting and relevant, and then put assets out that speak to that. And, you know, Apple, you know, we can all name the super cool brands, but, you know, I mean, I think you'll see things like Snakes on a Plane, which who knows how well it'll do, but, you know, they've made kind of kitsch into something kind of sexy among our demographic, and did some interesting things marketing with us. And I think it can be done, but you have to be very, very focused as a marketer. So there are some positives. And sure enough, if you type in Ronaldinho and Bolt, you know, you get all these Nike ads. And that's pretty cool.
I think it's actually a false concern to think about backfire here. It's not that just any exposure is good exposure, but if we're right about the community extension aspect of this, all communities discipline themselves in their messages. So what you got to be concerned with is not the backfire, but are you in tune with your audience? If you are, nothing can be offensive, like, because it's within the social context of your audience. So I think you know, that's one of the worries that bothers me, because it's an impediment to this whole industry, the people wanting to clutch their content close to them rather than interact with their customers and set their content free among the community that they're trying to work with.
Right.
And if we can do anything, it's to set that community free in these
Right.
places where that doesn't matter.
Well,
And
but
Stephen, go ahead.
But it does matter, well, it'll matter to the artists who are, depends how you're making a business out of it, because it will matter a lot to the artists who are working on those shows if it's mainstream media. You know, the separation, the cost of creating content is what's going to create the greatest challenge over the next few years, because the major content creators haven't crossed over that hurdle yet. So if you're competing against, I mean, I'll give the example of the New York Times, who we work with, who I think has done a fabulous job of creating their own video on the web, because they made the decision that they weren't going to take AP content and put it on the front page of the New York Times, because everybody had that. So they started putting cameras into the hands of their correspondents. And David Pogue, if you ever see his stuff, is great. It's low budget, you know, he shoots himself. He says, meet my crew, you know, he turns around and shoots himself. And so it's a very easy way to monetize and justify that expense. If you're ABC News and you're trying to do the same thing, or if you're a Hollywood studio and you're trying to do the same thing, you have a huge problem just letting all that go, because the people who participated in creating that are going to want to know where the check is.
Yeah, but there are other things you can do. I mean, if you're a record company, you can have all your artists call in. I mean, it's nothing that hasn't been done before, but call in from the road and say how the tour is going, and that's a podcast. Cost of production has gone to zero. You are engaging with your audience.
I'm saying that they should find ways to do that,
And
but
they
until
will.
that model breaks down, that Hollywood cost of production
Sure, that's right,
changes,
sure. Yep.
you've got a major
Right.
challenge in terms of paying for all that.
Stephen Colbert has, as his confidence has grown, and deservedly so, talks now about the Colbert Nation. You know, the Colbert Nation. And you know what? Stephen Colbert has a community, and certainly Jon Stewart has an unbelievable community. And yet neither guy interacts on the internet with their audience in any way. And why don't they? Because Bart's absolutely right. They have a nice contract. It doesn't require them to do it. So there's no economic incentive, and you know, beat it. You know, I mean, so that's that. You know, but if next contract goes around and they want to make more internet media revenue, they are going to have to find ways to get those guys interacting with their audience, which in Jon Stewart's case, people would kill for. He would get so much traffic.
Yeah. Well, but until they figure out how to monetize it, they're not going to do it.
Correct.
I have a whole list of questions here, and we've only gotten a couple of them done, but these are such good questions, so I'm trying to go through and see what's going on, see what we can come up with for the last few minutes.
Do you want any of these people to ask a question?
Well, there's a couple more questions. I'd really like to get you guys. Does anybody have questions they want to ask right now, or do you want to wait till the end? Anything pressing?
Oh,
Okay. Yeah, there's a flood of questions. Okay, well, hold them till later. Hold them till later, guys. So there's two new blogs, brand new blogs created every second, and 19 blog posts created every second, and that's like 4 months ago. So that's probably even bigger now. And so there's this just deluge of content coming into the blogosphere, and a lot of it's being advertised on, or there's anticipation for advertising on this stuff, and then there's all these, you know, of course, everybody's creating a blog, thinks that 1 million people are going to read their blog. How does, you know, what is the future of this? Where do blogs just fall into this massive abyss and never get found, or can you guys comment on like what's going to happen? Are there certain blogs going to rise to the top? Although, you know, there's just going to be a mess of blogs at the bottom. Is it sort of like search engines? The first page of search results, and then 1 million pages of something else that nobody's ever seen? How does...
I think it's going to be like websites. I mean, back in 1994, 1996, you had a bunch of people doing their own websites with pictures of themselves or their kittens or whatever on it. And then companies started getting into the game, and now we see a lot of different websites. You see branding, marketing websites, you see content websites, you still see personal websites. And I think blogs are following that same pattern where, yeah, you're going to have a mess of them at the bottom of just people talking to themselves or maybe a few friends. But the form of blogging, the form of the informal diary is already being figured out how to be used by different companies. And you're going to see various aspects of that. You're going to see marketing uses, and you'll see content uses and other uses we probably haven't thought of yet.
Yeah, I mean, every major media company is going to turn into a set of blogs, and that is going to be there. And then every MySpace user and Facebook user and whatever at any age is going to have a blog, because that's essentially a way you communicate. And it's not just blogging, it's photo feeds, product lists that you're saving, it's links that you're saving, it's sort of your identity on the web, and that's how you'll communicate. So some of it will just be communication and won't be as interesting to an advertiser necessarily unless we get into sort of behavioral targeting. But the top sort of higher quality blogs will rise, and you will have media models built on them, and they won't have to be powered by Dow Jones. They might just be Malik and his new blog company, right?
So it just doesn't matter. I mean, there's just certain blogs have expectations, others don't.
It doesn't, but I think what's going to happen is the hard part, and this is sort of, we're getting into interactive advertising and whatnot, which is the future, but I think the here and now is just with the fragmentation of the audience, how do we reach those users wherever they are? And how do we put together smart groupings of sites and so on so an advertiser can go in and make a meaningful buy to either target a certain demographic or certain behavior and reach them easily and effectively without having to go to just to Yahoo or just to one or two sites, just like network TV. Mm-hmm. And I think that's going to be the challenge. And there are companies like us and others that are trying to solve that. But that's a before we even get into content as ads and all of that, it's just how do we reach those users?
Evan, did you have something down there?
I guess I have a couple of thoughts. One is I agree with Tom in particular that the openness of the internet allows really anyone who has anything to say to go ahead and do that, which I think is fantastic and allows for really extremely deep topics or being able to go into a topic really deeply, I should say, and it kind of feathers out any numerous ways from there. But one thing I do think will potentially start to happen is people will get back into wanting some programming to actually occur, where you are surfacing some things to the top, and you're programming similar genres together and what have you. And I think that those types of things can actually be brought to some of the advertisers that we're talking about here in selling, whether that be genre-based advertising packages or things of that sort. I do think that those types of things will occur over time. Not yet. I don't think there's quite the amount of I don't want to say professionalism. That's not the right word, but
Good content?
yeah, good's a bad word. I really like to stay away from that. But that's probably what people are thinking. Yeah.
I mean, I'm not an expert on the blogging data. I do know that LiveJournal and Zanga skew massively young. Really, are 12 to 24. Half their reach is 40% of their reach, according to the very poor auditing services when it comes to under 18 people, is youth. So it's probably more like 70. And I know in my own case, that the same kind of user-generated mentality exists at Bolt. I think that the exercise for so much of the percentage of blogs that you just talked about, Brian, is people putting up themselves to a very small group of people and just having little modest interactions. And I think everybody wants an audience. I mean, if you think about this generation as the most creative generation, everybody wants an audience. So much of this is underlying by narcissism. And that's not a bad thing. I mean, that's part of kind of creating your identity as you go through life. And an audience of one is an audience to this group of people. And that's a hard thing. I think that's a hard thing for us to understand. What I do think is the answer to your question about the best blogs is, paid content raise money from interesting people. Huffington Post raised money from interesting people. I think what you're seeing is, obviously we had the Gawker already, and I think what you're seeing is it's a wonderful new way for journalists who aspire to really contribute something as content creators to circumvent I gotta go work at the New York Times for 15 years before someone will even take me seriously. So I think, you see it with Valley, what you see with a number of things. These people have real influence. It's fantastic. And they've moved way beyond Drudge. They're really, if you think about Drudge, he was the first person who did that. Mm-hmm. So I think that's the separation. Clearly people, smart people like, Eric Hippo at SoftBank or Alan Patrikoff at Graycroft are saying editorial content through blogs is valuable. And the rest of it, Zanga, whatever, they care less about. So that's a different mentality about blogging.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so everybody is a journalist. Everybody has the opportunity to be a journalist.
Yeah, but very few of them are good,
Very good,
theoretically.
yeah.
To some investors, very few of them are good.
Well, they're content creators. They're not necessarily journalists.
My girlfriend thinks my blogs are great. So there's...
Well, I have one thing. I mean,
Oh,
one thing
so.
I think that's important is that you have the low end of people, teenagers talking about what they did over the weekend, what party they went to, and so on. And you have the high end, which are essentially journalists, well-authored content. And then you have sort of in between, where you have people that are experts in particular topics and have something to say. They don't have a lot of audience, but the question is, how do you aggregate those into an audience that's meaningful for an advertiser?
Say a digital camera expert.
Exactly.
Who has great passion.
As 3,000 people come to the site,
Right.
maybe 5,000 people subscribe to his RSS feed. If he could find other like-minded sort of digital camera experts and all of a sudden aggregate that into something an advertiser could buy, that's interesting, right?
Very interesting to the advertiser.
One way you might totally reverse the question. Rather than thinking of the blog as an advertising projector, think of it as a source of personalization information for the advertiser who's going to go one-to-one. So turn it backwards. Because what strikes me there is that, and it's another generational or Republican age thing, how many people in the under 20 care about or have ever read a privacy policy on a website? This is a big deal for everyone. It's, everyone agonizes about privacy of information, and yet the big thing we're talking about is everyone narcissistically projecting everything about themselves and publishing it. So turn that around and say, well, how do I gather that information as an advertiser and use the blog space as a demographic tool? I think there's a completely reverse spin on
No,
that.
I think you lost us on that one, Doctor. No, I'm kidding. We only have a couple minutes left. You can see, I had like 5 closing questions. I didn't get through any of my body questions. We have a very provocative group here and with a lot of excellent input. And there's only a few minutes left. Does anybody have any questions for this very sophisticated and esteemed panel? Bueller? Oh, there. Okay.
I'll ask a question. I'm kind of in that age range, that demographic, where I'm not necessarily penetrated by internet ads. If you under 25, but I don't necessarily. You remember some jingles, I
Right.
shout about the wrong product in Jurassic Park. And what I'm actually thinking is, similar to the American Idol, Ford holds an American car. Ford is going down. I mean, it's their job to kind of step outside the box. Because for me, we grew up, buy form, and it made me think. So
Wow.
where my parents, I actually do drive a Ford. My parents were buy American. So my thinking is, don't you think that we can actually condition advertising and the medium that we use for who we're going after?
I think that's the whole game. I mean, I think that the notion that you try to match the advertising, what that advertising looks like, with the device, with the audience, is exactly what they all have to do. This notion that you can repurpose a 30-second TV spot and put it on the web, in and of itself, it was a ridiculous idea. I mean, it's what we've been living with, but it's a ridiculous idea. Why would you do that? It's a different medium. It's a different expectation. It's a different audience. It's a different device. Yet we're going to take this thing and we're just going to put it over here. And that's the part I think that has to change and break down. I mean, if you look at ESPN, and people have different feelings about it, it's a company that we work with as well, and you look at the brand and the way they use advertising and content and devices and audience, and they have a clear audience, but they have NASCAR audience and they have football audience and they have baseball audience, but they've done a remarkable job of understanding who their audience is, where they are, how they consume content, what they want to see, and bringing all that together on an infrastructure that makes that really easy to do. And if you think about the world that we live in and you really take a look at that, every marketer has that opportunity. They know who they're going after, they know what their product is, they need to learn where those people are, how to reach them effectively, and what that content needs to be created as in order to be effective. And then I think they'll find all of this to be successful. But to the degree they don't do that, they're going to go, oh, why was that campaign didn't work?
For me, look, I think that the reason search took off, Brian, is because it's, at its core, pretty simple idea. It's a pretty simple idea. Guys like you have made it way more sophisticated and add a lot of value to how you can think about it in more creative ways, but at its core, it's such a simple idea. I think one of the challenges that's holding us back is that agencies and publishers have not simplified what we've talked about today. And until things are simple, it's just really difficult for them.
No, you're right. And I wanted to thank you all again. There may be some more questions. Thank you very much, all the panel members, for their excellent contributions. And also, just to credit them, many of the questions I asked were contributions from the panel. So thank you all. Please come up and ask questions, get cards from these folks, and enjoy the rest of the show.